Welcome to Native America Calling. I'm Sean Spruce. A federal decision a decade in the making means a windfall for tribes in the hundreds of millions of dollars. Advocates for the change just announced by U.S. Treasury officials say it is a historic moment in tribal sovereignty and clears a path for a big boost in economic development. The decision involves the way tribes determine the taxability of certain benefits and services, like educational support, healthcare, and cultural practices. For the first time, those decisions are now in tribes' hands. We'll learn more about what this all means after the news.
This is National Native News. I'm Antonia Gonzalez. A team from the Canadian military has arrived at a northern Manitoba First Nation, which is dealing with a severe water crisis. One of the reserve's water treatment plants has been out of commission for 2 weeks after a power outage. More from Dan Karpenchuk.
The power was out for days after a power line that ran between two islands on the Nelson River broke. Although power was restored after a couple of days, the outage resulted in frozen water systems, sewer backups, electrical issues, and burst pipes. About 4,400 residents were displaced after the reserve declared a state of emergency. Pimicikamak is more than 300 miles north of Winnipeg. The chief, David Monias, says a 7-member military team from the Joint Operational Support Group based in Kingston, Ontario, has arrived and will provide technical assistance and support related to critical infrastructure.
The Army, with their engineers and their logistics people, are going to be taking a look at they're doing a site tour on the water plant right now, take notes and identify what needs to be fixed and assess how it needs to be fixed and what resources are required to fix it.
Monias adds that nearly every one of the 1,300 homes in the community will need some kind of repairs. And band councillor Shirley Robinson says having so many people forced out of their homes in midwinter is taking an emotional toll.
Like they really want to go home. And there's that feeling of displacement, that feeling of isolation, that feeling of that they can't be with their community.
Monias says a second military team is due to arrive on Wednesday. Meanwhile, plumbers and other skilled workers from outside the province are also on their way to Pimicikamak to help with water and electrical issues. And Monias says a U.S. company has reached out about sending a portable water plant to the First Nation. It's not the first time Pimicikamak residents were forced to leave their reserve. Many were forced to go south twice because of wildfires. For National Native News, I'm Dan Karpenchuk.
Indigenous peoples across the U.S. have been swept up in the Trump administration's crackdown on undocumented immigrants. As KJZZ's Gabriel Pietrorazio reports, an Arizona tribe is taking steps to safeguard its tribal members.
Thank you for calling the Wallapai Tribe's message line, where we encourage you to report any encounters with ICE agents.
The Wallapai Tribe near Kingman has set up a hotline.
Please leave your name and contact information, as well as the date, location, and a brief description of the incident. All information received will be checked and documented by tribal administration.
Wallapai Chairman Dwayne Clark is urging members to remain calm and always carry their tribal ID cards with them. His administration is also pledging to aid its 2,300 members in verifying their identity should they be held by federal authorities. This comes in the aftermath of a fatal shooting by an ICE agent in Minneapolis, also where 4 members of a South Dakota tribe have been detained. For National Native News, I'm Gabriel Pietrorazio.
In the Twin Cities this week, a number of tribes are issuing tribal IDs to their citizens. Tribal leaders have been raising concerns about the safety of their citizens in the area following last week's fatal shooting in Minneapolis. They're encouraging their citizens to carry identification, including tribal IDs. White Earth Nation, Red Lake Nation, Boys Fort Band, Mille Lacs Band, and Leech Lake Band are among tribes holding ID events at their urban offices. Leaders of Native organizations and grassroots groups have been responding to the shooting with community safety plans, as members of the Native community have been reporting interactions with ICE. A community prayer and gathering was held Sunday, and organizers are hosting Know Your Rights events this week. I'm Antonia Gonzalez.
National Native News is produced by Koahnic Broadcast Corporation with funding by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
Support for law and justice-related programming provided by Hobbs, Strauss, Dean & Walker, LLP, a national law firm dedicated to promoting and defending tribal rights for over 40 years. More information available at hobbsstrauss.com.
Tribal Development Partners, helping tribes build toward their goals through 105L leasing and essential facility development, empowering sovereignty, strengthening community. More at tribaldevpartners.com, proud supporters of this show.
Native Voice One, the Native American Radio Network.
This is Native America Calling. I'm Sean Spruce. Virtually overnight, tribes in the U.S. have hundreds of millions of dollars available to them, thanks to a decision by the U.S. Treasury Department. The action came with a stroke of a pen, but tribal officials have been working in earnest for more than a decade to make it happen. And it's a goal that tribes have pushed for more than a century. The change has to do with how tribes and their citizens are taxed. The new language puts them on the same level as states in determining what benefits, services, and enterprises are exempt from federal and state taxes. It also helps individuals and contractors by eliminating the need for extra paperwork for relatively small interactions. We're going to hear about what this means for tribes today, how it might boost business, and even outreach to some of the neediest tribal citizens. As always, listeners, please join our conversation today about what advocates are calling a historic recognition of tribal sovereignty. You can do that by calling us at 1-800-996-2848. Let's get some calls going today. The phone lines are open. Producers are waiting for you to dial 1-800-996-2848 or just use that touch screen pad you've got there on your phone, 1-800-99-NATIVE. Joining us now from Rosebud, South Dakota, is O.J. Seaman Sr. He is the co-executive director of Four Directions Vote. He is Rosebud Sioux. O.J., hello and welcome back to Native America Calling.
Oh, thanks for having me, Sean. As always, I really appreciate you guys doing things like this, and this is such a historic thing. I'm excited about it.
I am too, OJ, you bet. Joining us on Zoom from Uncasville, Connecticut is Lynn Malerba. She is the chief of the Mohegan tribe and former United States Treasurer. She is Mohegan. Chief Malerba, welcome back to Native America Calling, to you as well.
Oh, thank you so very much for having me on the show today. We're just so excited about the work that's happened and can't wait to get into the conversation.
Absolutely. And joining us from Concho, Oklahoma is Herschel Gorham. He is the Lieutenant Governor of the Cheyenne and Arapaho tribes. Lieutenant Governor, hello and welcome to the show. It's a pleasure to have you as well.
Hello, and thank you for having me on your show. I appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate all of you taking the time to inform our listeners today. OJ, let's begin with you. This tax change, it is a significant development for tribal enterprise, although it's not getting a lot of attention. Why do Native people need to know about this now?
Well, there's quite a few reasons, funding being one of them. But, what the core of this is actually tribes getting the United States government to recognize the treaties and the sovereignties of the tribe, and to actually get the Internal Revenue Service to conform with its own Constitution. Because the U.S. Constitution, I'll be quick, Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3, basically says this: Indians not taxed. And even after it was ratified, the 14th Amendment, Indians not taxed was left in there. So this is a long road that has been taken 100+ years to get to where the government actually has recognized the treaties of the tribes, the sovereignty, and it allows for traditional and cultural programs to be created that aren't under the scrutiny of taxation by the federal government. This again, is so historic. It means hundreds of millions of dollars for tribal members in this way. I always bring up the fact that, during times of storms, we get our people to go out there and chop wood for our elders and deliver that wood and make sure that they're okay and deliver food. Well, used to be before this, they would have to, if they made over $600, the tribe would have to do a 1099, and they would have to declare it on their taxes. And if they were in a social program, they would also have to declare it on that. With these new regulations, the tribes are in equal status with the states in determining what is taxable and what is not taxable. So this will actually let the tribes take care of traditional and cultural means, and at the same time, not require the ones that are doing the work for our elders and our youth to actually put it on their income tax as a profit in which they have to pay taxes on. I mean, this is just so historic. When you said you were going to talk about this, I was excited. I still am. There's a lot of things that can open up the door. But you have some great guests on here. I just wanted to start it out kind of given this is actually through our treaties and our sovereignty, and it matches the Constitution.
All right. Thank you, OJ. Now, hundreds of millions of dollars, that's going to get a lot of attention. That's going to perk up some ears. Now, you gave us one example, say somebody who goes out and chops wood for elders and is compensated by their tribe. Can you give us some more examples of how potentially tribal members will not be taxed, and also how this can impact the revenues of tribal businesses?
Well, on the other side, the gaming revenue is included in this general welfare exclusion. So, I mean, gaming revenue can now be used on cultural and traditional. To give you another example, I always say that, under treaties, they gave us IHS. And IHS was basically built for them to treat all the white man's diseases that were brought to us because we didn't know about it. But we, as a people that have been here since the beginning of time, we've had our spiritual leaders. We've had our healing ceremonies. And now tribes can look at using our spiritual leaders to take and conduct healing ceremonies for different individuals. And we have healing ceremonies for cancer, for all kinds of diseases that are now here. And so this allows our spiritual leaders to actually be able to make put food on their table at the end of a ceremony while they're healing somebody. I mean, it just gets down to our traditions. What we do, even us, culture is in Rosebud, we have our buffalo. And so we can use that in a spiritual way, and the work on that can be looked at as far as whether or not it's going to be a donation or not a donation. But one more thing that I forgot to bring out in the beginning is the fact that this is going to put a stop on IRS coming in and consistently auditing tribes for things like this. And what is so cool is in that workout that we had is they're not going to be able to do these audits until they meet with tribes, and they are going to be given comprehensive training on our treaties, on our culture, and on our tradition. I mean, this is just such a major thing that is happening because of our treaties and because of our sovereignty.
All right, thank you, OJ. Chief Malerba, you were among tribal leaders who worked to make this change happen. Can you give us an idea of when changing this language began?
Well, it began when we advocated for the passing of the General Welfare Exclusion Act, and that happened in 2014. All of the tribes got together, including all of the tribal organizations, to talk about this issue, because when we think about sovereignty, we think that tribes should be treated like every other government and be able to administer whatever programs and services they choose to provide to their citizens without fear of taxation. But what was happening was people were being taxed for some of those services by the IRS mistakenly, not thinking that they were governmental services, that it was individual benefits, which it was not. And a good example of that is there was a tribe that every year would give their tribal citizens $50 for each child so that they could buy a new outfit to go to school. And this was a tribe that was fairly impoverished. And those parents were getting 1099s and being audited and getting taxed on that $50. So when you think about audits at a bigger level, think about all the resources that a tribe needs to provide to address the audit and to kind of fight that narrative a little bit when actually those dollars are scarce and they could be used in better ways to provide for their tribal citizens. So we passed the General Welfare Exclusion Act, and part of that grew the Treasury Tribal Advisory Committee. And that was established through this act, and it did put the audits on hold, as OJ said, so that we can now educate IRS before they go back to auditing at all. The Treasury Tribal Advisory Committee worked with Treasury. The first meeting was actually held in 2017, 3 years after the act was passed. And the committee, who I was fortunate enough to be a part of, developed their priorities, and tribal general welfare exclusion was at the top of the list, and getting regulations so that tribes would have certainty about taxation. And the second one was tribally chartered corporations being treated like state chartered businesses. And that was another one. Now that had languished for 30 years. What is really important about this effort was that Treasury truly listened to Treasury Tribal Advisory Committee, to the tribal leaders who were advocating for good language, and through consultation, as well as the Office of Tribal and Native Affairs, because the Office of Tribal and Native Affairs was also established with the Treasury Tribal Advisory Committee, which we're very excited about, because now they are internal consultants to Treasury. What's really special about both of these regulations is that Treasury truly listened and really thought hard and long about what language to include, what not to include, and really truly respected tribal sovereignty. And you'll see that throughout both regulations, because ambiguities in the law will be resolved in favor of tribal nations by incorporating tribal deference.
Thank you, Chief Malerba. We're going to take a short break. We'll come back. We'll continue this conversation with Chief Lynn Malerba along with our other guests. And the phone lines are open now. Maybe you yourself have concerns with regard to how this might impact your federal income tax or your state income tax, and you've got questions. Call us, 1-800-99-NATIVE. Human rights organizations expressed major concerns during Nicolas Maduro's reign when it comes to Venezuela's indigenous people. Among other issues, they suffered serious health conditions from unregulated mining operations. We'll discuss whether Maduro's ouster means prospects could turn around for these minority populations on the next Native America Calling.
Every family caregiver could use help finding the necessary resources to care for their loved one. The AARP Family Caregiver Resource Guide helps family caregivers access key programs, services, and agencies in their communities. A copy of the guide is available by calling 877-333-5885 or online at aarp.org/caregiverresources. AARP supports this show.
Thank you for tuning in today to Native America Calling. We are hearing about a development on the federal level that will allow tribes to keep hundreds of millions of their own dollars every year. It's a relatively obscure language change that gives tribes much more control over how they are taxed. We'd love to hear from you this hour. Call in at 1-800-996-2848. That's also 1-800-99-NATIVE. One of our guests, Chief Lynn Malerba, joins us from Uncasville, Connecticut. She is chief of the Mohegan Tribe and a former U.S. Treasurer. And Chief Malerba, it's important to note that these regulations, they address two issues. First, there is exclusion from gross income for Tribal General Welfare Benefits, GWE program. So that impacts individuals who receive benefits and how their personal tax liability is impacted. And there's also this federal tax classification of entities that are wholly owned by Indian tribal governments. Let's talk more about that and what businesses these rules will benefit the most and what sort of barriers these businesses are currently facing will now be removed because of this.
Well, what's important to know is that state governments have had this consideration for 30 years. So if a state government as a wholly owned corporation operates a golf course or a hotel, any hospitality, an arena, their profits are not taxed because they are considered governmental revenues for the purpose of providing services to their citizens. It's important to note that tribes do not have a tax base because most of our land is held in trust for us by the federal government. So there's no means of having collateral, and we don't tax our citizens. So the only way we can provide services to our tribal citizens is through robust economic development on our lands. Tribes have been asking for the same consideration, that if a tribe has a wholly owned corporation, that those revenues should not be taxed because the revenues are specifically provided to our tribal citizens in the form of services. It has taken a long time to get there, but we're there now. And I think what's very important about this is that even if the corporation is wholly owned by two tribes, that still would reflect the non-taxable status of that tribal entity. Prior to this regulation being passed, it was chilling to tribes to think about, would we be able to be profitable if we were heavily taxed on various sectors of the economy and various sectors of economic development? So this provides tribes certainty in taxation so that they can create better and robust tribal economies.
Okay. Could you give us a little more clarification of what that means, wholly owned subsidiaries or businesses or entities? Because I'm thinking, like, let's say there's a tribal casino and it's actually it's under a Section 17 holding company, right? So the tribe might own the holding company, but the casino is actually part of this holding company. Like my tribe's set up that way, right? We have a development corporation that owns our casino. How will a business like that be impacted? I'm curious.
Well, I think that what we're trying to do is move away from the Section 17 because it takes so long to get certified as Section 17 and allow tribes to create its own laws and jurisdiction over those tribal businesses. And so it is a little bit different because we think that the tribes should be able to charter their own entities and their own corporations.
Okay. Now, you were U.S. Treasurer under the Joe Biden administration, first Native woman to hold that position. I want to give you props again for that accomplishment.
Thank you.
You bet. What were the discussions then about making this change for tribes?
Well, as I said, the discussions actually began in 2017 under the first Trump administration. They continued through the Biden administration. And then, so we got the proposed regulations out during the Biden administration, but the finalized regulations came out in the second Trump administration. What that points to me is that this is really a bipartisan issue. And I think what made a difference was really having in-depth conversations with the Office of Tax Policy and the Chief Counsel's Office at IRS and the Chief Counsel for Treasury. Also, what made a difference was bringing high-ranking officials from all of those departments throughout Treasury, but also the Secretary and the Deputy Secretary to Indian country, so they could see how important tribal economies are and how when there is a very robust tribal economy, it benefits the local economy, the state economy, and the federal economy, so that when tribes do well, everyone does well. I think it was eye-opening. I don't know that Treasury has had a lot of engagement with Indian country, and that made a difference because they could see on the ground what it meant. And I think that helped keep that conversation moving.
Now, this all is occurring under the Trump administration. What do you think they see as the benefit now of handing over this new power to tribes?
I think what the Trump administration sees is a decrease in regulation. And when you can cut through some of the red tape and cut through some of the regulation. It makes it easier to do business, and it allows tribes to be more creative in developing the businesses that are best suited to their locations, that are best suited to their culture, and also are best suited to achieving the goals that they want to achieve. And I'll just give you one example. In the state of Connecticut, between Mashantucket and the Mohegan Tribe, we support over 600 businesses by purchasing goods and services throughout the state. Not only do we support those businesses, but we also hire people from our local communities. So we create a better economy by being in the state of Connecticut and operating in the state of Connecticut. And we're not going anywhere. Tribes aren't going anywhere. We're committed to our regions, and we're committed to the place that we live.
Thanks, Chief Malerba. Let's talk more about how these regulations will impact specific tribes. And to do that, we have Herschel Gorham on the line. He is the Lieutenant Governor of the Cheyenne and Arapaho tribes. He joins us now from Concho, Oklahoma. And Lieutenant Governor, tell us, how do you expect these regulations will impact how your tribe is operating right now?
Well, I think for me, the best way to separate this is to talk about the two rulings that came out, because they're two entirely separate things. You know, you have the tribal entities that are created under tribal law that are wholly owned versus the General Welfare Exclusion Act. So in regards to the tribal entities not being impacted or required to pay federal income tax, that's huge for any tribe. Just like Chief Malerba said, you know, a lot of tribes to play it safe had pursued a Charter Section 17 under the Indian Reorganization Act, but as she said, it's a long process. Sometimes that process is tedious, expensive, and ultimately you can be denied, especially if you're an Oklahoma tribe like we are, because Oklahoma tribes didn't fall under the Indian Reorganization Act. We fell under the Oklahoma Indian Welfare Act, and so we'd have to first apply for a Section 3 if we then wanted to pursue a Charter Section 17. But to get around that, like we did, we created our own tribal corporation and tribal LLCs under our own tribal laws. But before this final ruling came out, it had always been up in the air whether or not the tribally created entities were going to be subject to the federal income tax as a business. That decision is now clear. We are not. So, as I stated the other day, I mean, it's a safe feeling to know that we no longer have to worry about that. That, as OJ said, we no longer have to worry about the IRS coming in and saying we need to see your books to make sure that you paid your federal income tax. We always treated our tribal corporation, the LLCs, as if they were tax exempt, but it was never clear whether or not they were until this final ruling came out. So, but also just to have your own tribal entity created under your own tribal laws versus going through the state, because anybody can create a corporation or LLC under the state laws, which a lot of tribes have done or chosen to do for whatever reason. But there's also some downsides to that as well, because if you do that, you're not protected from sovereign immunity. Whereas if you create your own tribal corporation or LLC under tribal law, you do maintain that sovereign immunity from that aspect.
Lieutenant Governor, the Cheyenne and Arapaho, you have a bison management project. Is that business or that entity, is it going to be impacted now by this new regulation with regard to federal tax classification?
I don't think it'll be impacted. I mean, like I said, we always treated it as if it was already exempt from federal income tax. And so we never paid any federal income taxes off of any business revenue that was derived from that. But now we know for certain that we're not required to pay federal income tax from any of our tribally created businesses under our tribal laws.
Your tribe
but
also...
in the long...
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
I was just saying, in the long run, that's obviously going to save a tribe hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars going into the future, knowing that I don't have to do that we are on the same parity as state-created businesses, just like Chief Malerba said.
What about the assistance that your tribe offers to tribal members? How do you see changes there?
Well, so under the General Welfare Exclusion Act, like Chief Miller said, it was created by Congress in 2014. A lot of tribes follow suit by creating their own tribal General Welfare Exclusion Acts, which we did here at Cheyenne Arapaho Tribe. We had an existing program prior to the 2014 Act that we as a tribe, we call it HOPE, which stands for Helping Our People Excel, where we were able to provide certain services to tribal members, primarily based on a low-income need, like payment for utilities or payment for rent or payment for mortgage or payment for food assistance, payment for athletic shoes, stuff like that. And I think OJ or somebody gave an example of, somebody getting a $50 card and then coming in and then receiving a 1099 on that and getting taxed. Well, thankful to the General Welfare Exclusion Act and the clarity on that, we're now allowed to make those determinations ourselves as to what we consider to be tax exempt from federal income tax. So that can be a whole wide range of things, including cultural activities as well. So for us, that's huge. I mean, it provides a safeguard to the tribes. It allows us to expand our tribal sovereignty because we're the ones that are in control of that when it comes to gaming revenues. I think OJ mentioned that as well, that tribes, if they wish to, instead of issuing a per capita payment to their tribal members from their gaming revenue, and then those tribal members receive a 1099 at the end of the year, and they're going to get taxed on that, now they can shift those same dollars into the General Welfare Exclusion Act program if they wish to and structure it properly, and then tribal members can receive those same dollars tax exempt from federal income tax, and they would not receive a 1099 at the end of the year and then be required to pay income tax on it. And for some tribes, that's going to be huge because some tribes receive a large per cap, some tribes receive a little per cap, but also when you talk about being able to justify lavish and extravagant, tribes now to make those determinations themselves and not the IRS.
Okay, that's interesting because let's say, like I deal with this, like I do tax returns for family members that get gaming per capita, and I know with a GWE program, basic needs, right, like food, shelter, health, transportation, that income can all be tax exempt through the GWE. But let's say somebody has per cap and, they're just going to use that money maybe to buy, maybe to go on a vacation or something like that. Just to clarify, that's still going to be taxable income?
My understanding is it will still be taxable income, again, for a tribe to be able to have their tribal members to be tax exempt from federal income tax or the gaming per cap. It has to be properly structured within their General Welfare Exclusion Act. I would say that the biggest hurdle for tribes to get over that hump is that once tribal members start receiving a per capita check, it's hard for many of them to let go and then for those same dollars, to be funneled through a General Welfare Exclusion Act program to be used to pay for housing, utilities, car payments, all these other things that we need to live. But for things like vacation, that's questionable. I mean, again, it's going to go back to how it's structured within a tribe's General Welfare Exclusion Act program. And I don't know if Chief Malerba wants to expand on that as well.
Okay. Chief Malerba, would you like to chime in here? Let's go, OJ. How about you? Because we just heard Lieutenant Governor talk more about the cultural programs, and I'd like to hear your thoughts. Now, I mean, how do you see this actually improving cultural programs, making them more effective, expanding outreach, making them more available to more people?
Well, these new regulations just opens up everything. One thing I will say, because it's going to be, there are going to be some complications. There are going to be some questions. The Coalition Large Tribes is going to be putting on best practices on their website so that people can go there and kind of get an idea, tribes moving forward. I know they'll have their own attorneys and whatnot looking at it, but I wanted to get that out there that, this is a new world for us. and we're only going to be shortened or not being able to do something because if we have a lack of vision. We can create programs that are traditionally and culturally sound within the tribes that would be able to hire people and look at it as being through the general welfare exclusion, as not being a person that works there from 8 to 5, 365 days a year, but being able to bring in people to help with our culture and our tradition, even to providing teaching lessons to talk about our culture, our traditions. I mean, it's just so wide open now that it's going to be whatever visions the tribe has that can move this forward. This is, like I said, they did the Constitution. They said Indians not taxed. Well, it took till 2026 to get the government to go with their own constitution. So this is just a great thing for Indian country. I think once we get, I myself would really look at using our spiritual leaders more. We can no longer, or they can no longer live on blankets and gifts. This would be able to help them do a service within a community and yet put food on their table at the end of the day.
Thank you, O.J. Seaman Sr., co-executive director of Four Directions Vote. He's speaking with us from his home in Rosebud, South Dakota. We're going to take another break. We'll come back and we'll close this conversation out with our guests, and then we're going to pivot to another semi-related topic with regard to student loans. So stay with us, and if you'd like to join the conversation, you can do so. 1-800-996-2848. Once again, that number is 1-800-996-2848.
Support from Clarkson Potter, publisher of Turtle Island, Foods and Traditions of the Indigenous Peoples of North America by Native American chef Sean Sherman. With ancestral and modern recipes, this cookbook showcases diverse foodways of the continent's regions.
Need help identifying community priorities? Kaufman & Associates' approach to evaluation is rooted in Indigenous knowledge, honoring tribal history, and sovereignty. More at kaufmaninc.com, KAUFFMANINC.com.
We're glad you're along with us today on Native America Calling. If you would like to weigh in on today's discussion, you can reach out to us right now, 1-800-996-2848, or you can leave a comment on our webpage, nativeamericacalling.com, or any of our social media platforms such as Facebook, Instagram, Threads, or TikTok. Chief Lynn Malerba of the Mohegan Tribe and former United States Treasurer, Chief Malerba, I'd like to have you close out this topic with us. And earlier there was some discussion with regard to GWE benefits and their taxability, and specifically from gaming revenues. Can you talk more about that?
Oh, sure. And that was a conversation, and I think, again, the regulations give deference to the tribes because in the GWE regulation, it talks about the fact that the funding can come from any source of revenues, including net gaming revenues, and that there's no imposition of a need requirement. So tribes get to decide for themselves what is most important to them, what are their community's priorities, and how they're going to administer those funds. And I think that's the most important thing. One other comment I'd like to make, though, which kind of didn't get a lot of notice, is the fact that economic development initiatives can qualify as general welfare, so that if a tribal nation wants to assist tribal individuals in starting tribal businesses, they can use the funds for that as well. What I've seen throughout Indian country is whenever there are native businesses and individual entrepreneurs within the tribe, they're hiring their own tribal members. So it's, again, another way to strengthen the tribal community.
All right, thank you. Let's go to the phones. We have Theodora, who hasn't called in a while, but she's on the line now. She's listening on station KMHA in North Dakota. Hello, Theodora. Great to have you on the show today.
Thank you for taking my call. I have a quick question. How do tribes have to create tribal tax codes now? And maybe the lady just answered the question, but the other question is, in what ways does this non-taxable status impact individual tribal members within the reservation boundaries and outside of the reservation boundaries?
Oh, that's a good question, Chief Malerba. I mean, some tribes already do have tax codes. Can you talk more about that? And again, I mean, I think there's just a lot of people who are questioning now, like, well, how much of my income is potentially subject to federal income tax, especially like, say, I get gaming per cap or something like that.
Right. So again, I do think some tribes do have, very robust tax codes and some do not. But what's more important is that the leadership of the tribe create the General Welfare Exclusion Program. So they're the ones that write their own regulations for that. And there is also deference given to tribes that perhaps only use oral tradition and don't write down their codes and their laws. So there, again, a lot of flexibility in this regulation.
All right. Thank you so much. Really appreciate our guest talking about this topic today, as well as our caller, Theodora. And again, that number, 1-800-996-2848, for anyone else who would like to join our discussion today. Let's pivot now. The Trump administration just issued a warning to student loan borrowers that they may have their tax refunds, their paychecks, or even Social Security benefits seized if they fall behind on their payments. And an analysis by the American Council on Education finds Native students rely on loans more than their white counterparts, and they have a harder time paying them back. Let's talk more about this, and to do that, joining us now from Bismarck, North Dakota, is Scott Scaro. He is a board member of the National Association of Student Financial Aid Administrators and the financial aid director for United Tribes Technical College there in Bismarck. He is a citizen of the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe. Scott, hello, and welcome back to Native America Calling. It's great to have you on the show today.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Now, after a 5-year pause on student loan garnishments, the Department of Education is now tightening repayment options this year for student loan borrowers. What does this mean for Native students?
Yeah, student repayment issues, have been a topic that's been going on at least for 15 years. The current structure of how students repay and how our schools are made accountable actually goes back to the Obama administration. What is new now, though, is how the enforcement of these overdue loan payments are going to be more harsher, more on a level of like IRS level where they start going after your paychecks. So it is concerning how students will be in a financial issue that they aren't able to make the repayments, and then their own earnings now will also be in jeopardy. They're already spread thin, but now they'll also be in jeopardy of making these payments.
Okay, so if I'm a student right now and I have student loans, or maybe I'm out of school for a year or two and I'm concerned about what this means, what should I be doing right now to get ahead of this situation?
Well, first of all, you should find out where you're at. I mean, there are still some income repayment options that can reduce the amount you would pay back. Generally, once you're out of school from the time you leave school, you usually have like a small buffer, about 3 months before your loans go into repayment. And then if you completely ignore all those repayments, you could go into default after 9 months. So it's basically about 12 months after you leave school for whatever reason. You don't have to graduate, but whatever reason you leave school, it's about 12 months before you would go into default. Now, to find out how much you owe and how to get out of default, you need to know who you're supposed to pay, the loan servicer, which seems like it would be an easy way of knowing who that is, but actually is very confusing for students because sometimes their loans are sold or moved between servicers. So the one resource you should go into as a student is studentaid.gov. It's the same login that they would use for a FAFSA application. So they log into there, and then they would go into their loan portfolio, and it would tell them who to contact about that, because they need to, at some way, rehab their loan payments and then find what the options are for how much they could possibly pay depending on what kind of income they're making.
Okay, Scott. What about for private student loans? Because I think a lot of people might just assume, well, we're talking primarily about federal student loans, but a lot of people have the private loans as well. Are they at all subject to this new directive?
Yeah, that does make it a little bit more complicated. They can put you in a default status, the private. So for the schools that are offering private status, I mean, I would try first by contacting their financial aid office so you can get in touch with the right person on that and see what your options are to try and rehab yourself and get out of that default status. But a private loan can put a default on your official student status. So when you would pull in a federal report and it would come through as default.
All right, thank you. What do you think this means? I mean, big picture here. I mean, we hear about there was the pause, and that was because of the pandemic, and the pandemic now, that was 6 years ago. So some people listening might be thinking, well, that was a long time for the pause for student loans. Now, they're picking up the pace. They're going to start garnishing again. But again, we've got a lot of students, Native students, who really struggle to pay for school, underserved communities. What's your overall view here in terms of the big picture?
Yeah, I mean, loans in general, I think carry a lot more negatives than they do for positives. The other thing to keep in mind is that Native students access federal Title IV aid more than average students. So we rely on these systems. And then you have a lot of these kind of negatives that come with it. I will say that at one point, working for tribal colleges, that one of the schools I had worked with had really bad default rates, and to the point where we stopped participating in the federal loans. One interesting thing was after we got out of the student loan system, our average aid per student actually went up without the loans. So that was kind of a revelation to me that there are quite a bit of resources out there for Native students, and sometimes getting into debt is way easier than filling out some of those scholarship applications. And so really finding out where those resources are, and that starts with, number one, filling out a FAFSA to see what you're eligible for Pell, and then number two, contacting your tribe's higher education office, and they do have funding through your tribe meant for higher education, and then finding out what their deadlines are and what their application procedure is there.
Scott, you mentioned there at the college you saw higher default rates from your students with student loans. What did you attribute that to?
I think a lot of it actually, and it seems like a weird thing, but when your school doesn't cost very much, and most tribal colleges, aren't making it rich through their schools. They're very affordable, and they cost way less than normal state schools. So when you don't charge very much, you don't need very many students to go into your student loan roster. Only like a few that really need it may go in there. So what happens is that a lot of like 4.0 really excellent students, what they do is they start using up their cost of attendance through other like high-profile scholarships and grants to the point where they're no longer eligible for loans. So then all you're left with is maybe some students who are struggling or may, like I said, may not take the time to fill out scholarship applications. They're the ones that are put into loans, and then that overall loan rate affects your school harder than it would a state school. And the reason why is a state school costs more, and by the fact that they cost more, they have more students in that student loan portfolio. So their calculation is encompassing everybody, and that's generally not what happens at a tribal college.
Yeah, that's a really good point to make. You know what's interesting? I mean, we were talking earlier with the previous guests about gaming per capita income and just some of the different issues there. And I have experience with one tribe where if students get a tribal scholarship and they don't finish, they owe that money back to the tribe, and often their per capita is garnished. So as a result, you have some of these kids that didn't finish, and they're now taking out student loans because they can't get a tribal scholarship now, and they're even facing a garnishment from their tribe for that scholarship money that they didn't complete school with. So it's tricky. You know, it's just, it's a lot to digest here. It really makes me think. Scott, the Trump administration is now proposing to change designations for some degrees, like, for example, nursing and public health, and that would limit loans and financial aid for those students. What's the status of that, and what does it mean for Native students?
So those limits do go into effect for the next school year, the 26-27. So those basically go into effect potentially for any summer programs this year. There was a lot of confusion, I know, on social media about what's considered professional and, is the administration not considering nursing a professional degree? But there is a unique distinction here. We're only talking about graduate school. So this doesn't affect any of the undergrad students. And now, so we move to graduate schools, master's, doctorate programs. They are limiting how much loans you can get in certain professions. And so there was a notice that was sent out by the Department of Education that listed specific degrees. And, one of them that was left off was nursing, but then you had some religious degrees put on there, and so the conversation turned into, why can someone following a priesthood degree get it and not a nursing? So there's still a lot of discussions that need to go on as what kind of professions can be included into those higher loan limits for grad students.
All right. Scott, we're just about ready to wrap up the show. I have time for one more question. How are you keeping track of all of these changes happening for student loan borrowers?
It is a challenge, and it's going to be a challenge for anybody working at a tribal college because they have limited resources. Tribal colleges, we do have our own conference in the summer at Salish Kootenai up in northern Montana. So that's a good way for us to kind of come together and lean on each other. There's a lot of professional organizations. I know it was mentioned in the beginning. I've been doing work with the national organization NAS for about 10 years in different capacities. But there's also regional organizations, and every state has their own state organizations. So financial aid offices across the country, we're all in this together. And if there are any tribal people out there that are maybe unsure of where they're at, really lean on one of your colleagues because there's a lot for us to get through. And overall, the regulatory environment, unfortunately for us, is getting more complex. It's not getting easier in 2026.
And with that, we are out of time, so we're going to wrap it up. Big thanks to all of our guests who joined us today: Scott Scaro, Lieutenant Governor Herschel Gorham, O.J. Seaman Sr., and Chief Lynn Malerba. Join us again tomorrow when we'll hear about the changes currently happening in Venezuela and how they impact the indigenous people who live there. I'm Sean Spruce. You've been listening to the one, the only Native America Calling.
Support by the Gathering of Nations Powwow. The last dance is this April 24th and 25th at Expo, New Mexico. The Gathering of Nations Traders Market will be in the Creative Arts and Lujan buildings both days. Tickets available at gatheringofnations.com and at the gates.
Support from Clarkson Potter, publisher of Turtle Island, Foods and Traditions of the Indigenous Peoples of North America by Native American chef Sean Sherman. With ancestral and modern recipes, this cookbook showcases diverse foodways of the continent's regions.
Repatriation is the return of ancestors and stolen culture. The Association on American Indian Affairs is hosting the 11th annual Repatriation Conference, Feeding the Fire, Advancing the Movement, in February 2026. This fully virtual conference will offer small group interactive workshops, strategies, networking, and more to advance domestic and international repatriation. More at Indian-Affairs.org. The association supports this show.
Native America Calling is produced in the Annenberg National Native Voice Studios in Albuquerque, New Mexico by Koahnic Broadcast Corporation, a Native nonprofit media organization. Funding is provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting with support from the Public Radio Satellite Service. Music is by Brent Michael Davids. Native Voice One, the Native American Radio Network.